Hi, my name is Felix Matos Rodríguez, and I am the Chancellor of the City University of New York. People who know me call me Felo, and this is my new conversation space on CUNY TV, Café con Felo. Bienvenidos a Café con Felo. For this inaugural episode, I wanted to start very close to home with the host of New York One's Inside City Hall, our very own Errol Louis. In addition to being the host of Inside City Hall and a CNN commentator, Errol is also the former director of urban reporting at the Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. Previously, he served as a columnist and editorial board member at the New York Daily News. He has won numerous journalism prizes and has also taught at Pratt Institute, Long Island University, NYU, and at CUNY's own Hunter College. Welcome, Errol, and the critical question. How do you like your coffee, and how much of it do you drink?
Negro sin azúcar.
Negro sin azúcar, that's
Black,
great.
no sugar. And I actually try to keep myself down to 2 cups of coffee and none, or at least no caffeinated coffee after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My doctor told me I have to try and get some sleep. You have to take it easy on it a little.
My team also says, please have no more coffee after that because, you know, the intensity gets too high. But I drink it the same way. My grandfather used to say, no sugar because the sweetness is inside.
Oh, I like that.
Yep.
I like that.
But thank you for being here in our first Café con Felo. And before we go into sort of the Errol Louis, the journalist, I want to talk about El Profesor, the professor Errol Louis. Tell me, what made you want to go teach at the J School? What attracts you to the student, to the program there? I mean, give me a sense of that side of your life.
Well, here's the short answer is I got a call from the dean of the school shortly after I started at New York One. Sarah Bartlett, the dean at the time, called me up and asked if I would co-teach actually she was not even the dean at the time, she was a professor. She called and asked if I would co-teach their urban reporting class on how to report on government and politics in New York. And I said yes, because just as you mentioned, I taught at a number of different schools over the years. Frankly, I thought I was going to be a professor. My training is in part, I was in the PhD program at Yale University after I finished Harvard, and I thought I was going to be a professor. And so I went pretty far down that path before I decided it wasn't going to be for me. And along the way, I really was required to do some teaching. I found that I liked it, to teach about government, to teach about politics, and then eventually to teach about journalism or political reporting, which really kind of brings it all together. So it was a very easy ask. It was very easy to say yes. And of course, as you know, if you're doing a good job teaching, you're also learning in the process. So to be a teacher-learner, it's a way to sort of continue your education.
Well, our students are lucky to have you. And I was going to ask you that. I mean, how does that reflect on then your work as a journalist? Because you are commenting in the classroom, bringing the best techniques, getting feedback from the students too. What's the impact of that in, let's say, your show or some of the other things that you do in journalism?
Well, first of all, I mean, they do really good work. This is a graduate program in journalism. So these are working journalists who are going out there finding great stories. And almost every year, I do at least one segment where I bring them on, not because they're my students, but because they're doing something that's interesting and newsworthy and worth talking about, and they're at the cutting edge of knowledge about it, and they just become like any other guest, somebody that I want to introduce my audience to. In addition, I've learned a lot about them from techniques. I mean, I'm older than I look, so when I graduated college, Felo, I was working on a manual typewriter. I mean, an electric, IBM Selectric was considered state-of-the-art, and I didn't even have that. So now the tools that people have now, the iPhones, the social media, all of the different techniques, I get an update every year by teaching this class, because my students tell me what they like to use. So for example, I asked them for a program, just last year in the program, I asked for a video, go shoot a video, go do a video story. We work on different platforms. Some are audio, most are print, some are video. The student came back and said, can I do it as a TikTok video? And I said, what's TikTok? We're all learning.
Let me stay in journalism, but switch. We've been talking about technology, everything that's new. There's something that is not new about journalism, which is the whole relationship to facts, to objectivity. right? Which is something that is very contested these days. And I wonder, and you're in the political space, which I think might make it even more complicated. What is your relationship with the idea that you have to report facts, and when and you navigate this very polarized political climate? How do you teach and talk about that to the students, and how do you practice that in your own journalism life?
Well, in both cases, both how I do the work and what I tell the students about how they should do their work, I put aside the word objectivity because it's a very loaded term, and it's aspirational in ways that I think are not that helpful. What I tell people is you should worry about fairness. Worry about being fair. You have a point of view, I have a point of view. We all come into our work with all kinds of baggage and history, and the point is not to pretend that those don't exist. The point really is to make sure you're giving everyone a fair hearing, especially when it comes to political reporting. Make sure all sides feel like they've been heard and that they said what they had to say and that you gave them an opportunity to be heard. That's plenty. That's a lot of work.
Yep.
That's a lot of work. And if you can get that right, and people are not complaining about what you did, and you said, all I tried to do was be fair, and you corrected if you were seen as unfair, if you decide that what you did was really not quite fair. It's the best way, I think, to sort of stay on an even keel. As far as objectivity and facts, I mean, it's a shame that we have to even argue about it, but I'm old school enough to think that the truth is the truth, and that there's an obtainable version of the truth. Nobody can claim that they know all about every side of every issue, but you go in and you diligently, with an open heart and with the best skills and training that you have, try to be fair about getting the best obtainable version of the truth and put it out there. And then at that point, there are people who are going to argue in bad faith, and at some point you have to close off that part of the conversation, because the reality is, I would compare it to the weather. Let's say it's raining. Some people like rain, some people don't like rain, but if you want to come on my show and say it's not raining, it's going to be a very short conversation.
That's good to know. So you began to give us a little bit of a sense of your trajectory. You said that you had trained, you were going to become a professor, and probably in politics, right? That was your first love.
That's exactly
maybe
right.
an ongoing love in your career. But you've had, and I don't know that our viewers know that, I mean, they might know you as a professor and your role as a journalist, but you had connections to banking, you ran for office, so you had a really, really rich New York City life. Can you give us a sense of that, of how that journalistic side sort of came to be like the most dominant part of your current life?
Oh, sure. Well, frankly, it's the only thing I'm really trained for. So everything else you described was kind of a wandering before I figured, you know what, let me get back to my home path. I got my first story published when I was 19 years old in the Amsterdam News. The Harlem-based newspaper that my dad as a kid used to deliver. I was overjoyed. It was a very difficult story. It was about sex abuse in East New York, So I'd show people all excited, hey, look at my story. And it's this horrible, horrible story.
You didn't decide to start with a puff piece.
Well, no, it was never really about that. Yeah. It was about getting out there and telling the story of the city, or a piece of the story of the city, about things that matter. And that has always been my guiding star. Like, I want to do stuff that matters. That's really important. Not just to me, but to the city as a whole and its governance. And so that's what I began doing while I was in college. I stumbled into it, found that I loved it, was overjoyed to find out that I could make a living doing it. And along the way, I've found other things that started to interest me. I went back to graduate school because I had been spending so much time doing journalism. I realized I didn't really know anything.
Okay.
So I went to graduate school to actually try and study and to try and learn languages. I studied a little Spanish. I then traveled a little bit as well. And along the way, stories that I had been writing about, in particular about the financial needs of low-income New Yorkers, and I discovered it was a national problem and even an international problem, led me into the credit union movement. I began writing a newsletter for cooperativas, for financial cooperatives, and I began to work for an organization. They invited me to write the newsletter. I needed the money, so I did. It was a national organization, so they said, well, there are credit unions all over the country, and we are a very small nonprofit with almost no money. but we'd love you to try and write about some of the things they're doing. And I'm thinking, hey, I'm 23 years old. I got a driver's license and a car, and
I'm set.
Full tank of gas, and I would drive to Mississippi. And all along the way, I would stop in Philadelphia, in North Carolina, in Alabama, and visit different credit unions. And these were in small towns, so you didn't have to have an appointment. Right. If you came into town, there was nothing else going on. They're always, and it's the bank.
And they're probably very happy to have you come.
Sure, sure. And I was just there to write up whatever it was they were doing. They were making loans of a particular kind for businesses or for families and so forth. And then I began to do what was called technical assistance, because somebody would have a problem in North Carolina, and I'd say, I don't know anything about any of this, but I can call the people I just left in Philadelphia and ask them what they would do. And then after about a half a year of this, I became a technical assistance person providing assistance to these. And, and then over time, after a couple of years of doing this, and I did some for the Ford Foundation and got to travel all over the country. Went to Colorado, went to California, went to Chicago, all throughout the South, and eventually worked with this organization, to raise money, to get policies changed, started writing policy to help them testify in Washington to get some laws passed. It was really a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it seems like you had a great experience and also a great formation. And you mentioned in that all this sort of travel, and you studied outside New York City, but now you're a quintessential New Yorker, and you could have stayed, and in many of those places that you visited, you could have done a career elsewhere, but you came back to New York, and I would like to talk a little bit about your commitment to New York City. How do you think that informs your journalism or your commentary and how you approach your craft?
Well, two things have happened. One is you can have a national and even international perspective from New York. Now, I don't know what it's like if you're reporting out of Dallas or Chicago or some other place, but we got the United Nations here. I've done reporting from there. I've done broadcasting from there. We've got, national, in 2016, when I was a questioner in the final debate between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. She had been our senator. Bernie was from Brooklyn.
Brooklyn College, graduate, yes.
They were both fighting for the chance to run against Donald Trump, who I'd interviewed. He was my first field interview when I came here. So when people say, well, you do local politics as opposed to national politics, and I say, well, they're really one and the same. Like, you can't understand one without the other. A lot of the White House reporters, especially during the Trump administration, are my buddies from City Hall. We were all reporters reporting on city politics. So I don't make those kind of fine distinctions, but I think it is important that, if you're going to understand politics, it's really not that different from the White House down to City Hall, down to the City Council. Some of the basics just don't change. You got to have a message, you got to have a base, you got to raise money. I think I've seen most of the kinds of trickery and fraud that exist in politics, and that stuff never really changes. That goes back in time. And so I feel very comfortable. When I get a call from CNN, they might want to talk about international affairs, or they might want to talk about local affairs. And to me, it's all in the same newspaper. Yeah. It's all in the same area of concern that I have. And that's been true for me from the beginning.
And how fortunate are students in the J School to have someone with that perspective, with that kind of experience. One of the great things about having adjuncts like you, who are practitioners, teach our students. Can you go back to what we were talking about the J School and the value that you see in the education, particularly a public education that the J School and CUNY provide? So what's the addition? What's the value you see in that?
Oh, it's essential. We can't run this city. We can't run this democracy without having a well-trained, energetic, creative, highly skilled press corps that's out there to inform people. So the political reporting that I'm teaching the students how to do, what I always tell them is that we're intending to help people get to a decision point. The podcast that I do is called You Decide, because that's really what all of this is about. We want to help the voters understand what's going to happen as Election Day approaches. We want to help the policymakers understand what's going on in the streets and in the neighborhoods as they make decisions about what laws to pass or policies to implement, we have to try and keep people honest. You know, we have to explain what's happening in court cases or in complex policy. So just like my colleague, the weather reporter, shows you all of the maps and the models and the clouds and the jet stream and everything else and warns you about an approaching hurricane, well, I try to do the same with, you know, with poverty, with economic growth, with criminal justice, with health policy, and all of the other concerns, housing, that make up the main concerns, education, and sort of show people, this is what the map looks like, this is a storm that's approaching, there are different ways that we can do it, and once in a while you have to tell people, it's time to run and take shelter.
Mm-hmm. So, and we have less than 2 minutes, so I wanted some advice for the students and for the audience. Obviously, in your line of work, you have to be objective, you have to be fair, you have to develop a reputation. How do you balance being able to get the inside scoop and being connected with electeds, with their staff, and then also that line in which you need to, when they come to your show, they know that you're going to be tough on them and fair and balanced? How do you navigate that insider, but also that persona of the journalist?
It's a great question. I mean, what I always remind my students is that you can be as friendly with them as you want off hours. You can like their philosophy or admire them. Some politicians, some political leaders I met are really admirable people. I'm thinking of the late David Dinkins in particular. But in the end, their problems are not your problems. Their problems are not our problems. You know, we can help them to the extent that we're reporting on government policy, try and help understand what's going on in the subways, what's going on with public safety, how do we make the schools better. We're sort of all engaged in the same process, but in the end, if somebody's taking a bribe or lying to the public or abusing their employees or misleading the public, people
need to know.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, so you have to, you know, have a guiding star, which is your audience, the truth, the people that you're working for and writing for. And sometimes it can be a lonely place, and I try and tell people everything. I've been slandered, I've been mocked, I've been sued, I've been threatened. It happens all the time. It is part of what happens. But you also have the First Amendment. This is the only profession that is specifically mentioned in the Constitution and has a specific constitutional protection. And that, plus the other rewards of the job, including pay if you're lucky, will see you through. And I try and let people know. I've been doing it for 40 years.
And with great distinction, and thank you for that comment. Thank you for that, Errol, and thank you for sharing your stories with us and for letting me, for a change, ask the question. Supposed to be on the other side. It was kind of strange, but I enjoyed it. We're going to be taking a very short break. When we come back, we'll be taking questions from some of the students that Errol teaches at the Graduate School of Journalism. Stay tuned. So, welcome back. You are watching Café con Felo, and today my guest is Errol Louis, the former director of urban reporting at the great Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY, and also the host of New York One's Inside City Hall. Each episode of Café con Felo will allow CUNY students to ask me or my guests any burning questions they might have. This episode, we have questions from our students in the School of Journalism. So let's roll the first question.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Rand, and I'm a first semester graduate student here at the J School. My question for Mr. Louis is, I'm about to go out on an assignment where I have to interview random people on the street, and I was wondering how you get busy New Yorkers to talk to you.
Oh, that's a great question. It's one of the first things we do. Sometimes I don't know how they're doing it this year, but sometimes it's on the very first day of the very first semester. You tell people, put all your tools down, here's a list of questions, go out into Times Square and start, because it's a skill. Approaching people, stopping people, getting them to talk to you. It's a skill that you can learn. Most people are a little uncomfortable with that, especially in New York. But you know what I have found is always helpful, and I tell my students this is, instead of going up to people and sort of trying to stop them and ask them a lot of detailed questions, you start with something like, "Hi, I'm a student. Will you help me?" you start with "Will you help me?"
Breaks the
most
barriers.
people will say yes, and you want to get to a yes as quickly as possible. Even if people are in a hurry and they'll say, "I'd love to help you, but I can't right now." That's fine. That's better than people assuming you're trying to swindle them or sell them something or otherwise make their life difficult.
Okay, thank you for that. The second question from Eduardo.
Bueno, mi nombre es Eduardo González. Soy estudiante de primer semestre de la Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. Mi pregunta para Errol Louis es ¿cuál es su principal acercamiento o cuál es su principal interés en términos periodísticos en su cobertura acerca de las comunidades latinas aquí en Nueva York?
So you mentioned you're taking Spanish, so there's no need for me to translate that, right?
No, not really. Yeah, I mean, the answer is at New York One in particular, we pride ourselves on being a bilingual newsroom because we have New York One Noticias. Yeah. I have a number of colleagues. They have parallel broadcasts. One of our political reporters, you may know him, Juan Manuel Benitez. Yes. He has taught at the journalism school for a number of years. And he has a show called Pura Politica.
I've been there, yes.
Okay, so we've all done that. I personally, I don't think the coverage of the Latino community, the political side of it in New York, has been done very well by English language media. So I try to do something on a regular basis because there's actually an interesting empowerment question that's on the table right now. There are no citywide Latino elected officials, and there never have been. There are no statewide Latino elected officials, and there never have been. And yet this is something like 24% of the registration of the Democratic Party. So how does this happen? Why does this happen? What's going to be done about it? These are questions that have been brought up from time to time, and I think it's important that we try and get some answers to those questions from the elected representatives, the party leaders, and right now there have been no real answers.
And and at the J School too, they have an entire line of dealing with reporting in Spanish, in Spanish-speaking communities, so very much paying attention to that phenomenon. So I agree with you. It's a very interesting moment, and those questions, are very, very important.
Something like 40% of the enrollment in our K through 12 public schools
it's
Latino. Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, we are turning into a Latino city, and the institutions and the politics have not caught up with that reality.
I totally agree. Let's go for the third question.
Hi, my name is Deidre Foley. I have a question for Errol Louis. My question is, what is the toughest interview you've ever had to do?
Oh, that's a good question. I think probably the toughest interview I ever had to do was there was a case, and there have been many of these cases, where somebody is seriously mentally ill, maybe acting out. The parents or the guardians, loved ones, they call for help to 911. The police arrive. There was a case in Brooklyn where that happened. And the way it played out was a tragedy. The police arrived and they shot the young man to death. And I knew some of the cops there. I come from a law enforcement family. I had some sources there.
I think your father, right?
My father, my sister, my uncle, nephews.
God, okay.
Yeah. I had to interview the mother. This is just within a few hours of her son having been shot to death. She was in utter shock. And yet, this is for the newspaper. This is trying to sort of tell the story of what happened. That's my job. And you have to get the details right. How did he spell his name? What was his nickname in high school? What school did he go to? You have to get your 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why, from somebody who is utterly shattered, and you have to keep your own emotions under control and actually get the information and also bring the story in. It's a very tough thing to do, and that's the thing that comes to mind as one of the harder kinds of interviews.
And that's hard. An interview that you would like to have back, that you had the interview and you felt that you wanted to get something, and the individual was either sneaky or it didn't work out, and you said, I want to get a shot to do that again.
Yeah, my first field interview, as I mentioned, was with Donald Trump. So it's
surprising that the name comes up.
It's 2011. They said you're going to go down to Trump Tower. There's this, everybody knows who Donald Trump is. He's talking about running for president. I didn't think he was at all serious about it, but this was a chance for me to learn how to do a field interview. And so I go down to talk to him, and you know, I wish I could get that back. You know, knowing now what I didn't know then, because after a few minutes of talking with him, I realized he didn't know anything about the political questions I was going to ask him about. I was going to ask him about foreign policy, about urban policy, education policy, but nobody knew back in 2011, 2012 that he was actually serious. And he, in fact, had not made up his mind yet to actually run.
You might get a shot again to do that.
Oh, no, that's not going to happen. I was one of the people he attacked publicly. He said, Errol Louis has been very unfair to me, and on and on and on and on he went.
Well, I hope that I've been fair to you
Absolutely.
in this interview, and I'm going to use a line that you use occasionally, which is, I'm afraid that's all the time that we have. So I want to thank you, Errol, again for being here, for the work that you do with our students at the School of Journalism, and for being such a beacon of integrity here in New York City, and for helping me to launch this new space of conversation on CUNY TV, Café con Felo, where we will continue to explore how CUNY lives and helps to reinvent New York City. Please tune in for Café con Felo every weekend. That's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. on CUNY TV. Ciao.